My name is Cora Phillips. They thought they buried the truth with her, but I'm the one who handed a federal judge my parents' offshore accounts on a silver platter and watched my sister's composure crack on the witness stand like porcelain hitting marble. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you are not going to believe what my own family did to me. It started in a funeral home, of all places. The air was suffocating. Lilies and lemon polish, the kind of smell that clings to grief and guilt and never lets go. I was sitting in the second pew in my black dress, clutching a small, leather-bound Bible my grandmother had given me on my 10th birthday. For when you need to remember there's something bigger than your family, she'd said, laughing. I thought she was joking then. Emmett sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee, but not squeezing. He always knew when I needed space, even in a crowd. Ahead of us, my sister Annalise sat straight-backed beside our mother, Valora. The two of them were dressed like they were attending a charity gala rather than a funeral. Annalise in charcoal gray, hair pinned tight, her dry eyes scanning the room like she was taking inventory. My grandmother, Eleanor Jane Phillips, lay in an oak casket at the front. She was 81. She had built Harrow Heritage Holdings from a small antique shop into a real estate empire with nothing but grit, intuition, and a stubborn refusal to let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. She wasn't perfect, but she was the one person who ever looked at me like I mattered more than the family name. I shouldn't have been surprised when the lawyer stepped forward, but the way Raymond Eckhart held that envelope, like it was already scorched, that was my first warning. Per the last will and testament of Eleanor Jane Phillips, he began, monotone, as the air in the room went still. I barely heard the first parts. My mother and father, Valora and Arden, received a trust allocation worth $4.2 million. Annalise received controlling shares in the company, investment accounts, and the antique jewelry collection. She didn't even blink, like she already knew. Then Raymond glanced at me, his mouth barely moved. To Cora Phillips. The testator leaves full ownership of the property located at 11 Wexley Hill Lane. That was it. Just the house. No shares, no money, not even the ring my grandmother had promised me on my wedding day. The sapphire one she used to let me try on when I was 6, spinning it on my tiny finger while she told me stories about the women who wore it before her. That's impossible, I said, standing before I realized my legs had moved. She told me, the last time I saw her, she told me everything would go to me. My father didn't even look at me. He tilted his head slightly, like the matter was already settled. That was before the will was finalized, he said coolly. Apparently, she changed her mind. Don't patronize me. My voice cracked, but I held my ground. I want to see the will, the actual document. The room tensed. Arden and Raymond exchanged a look, short, sharp, a scalpel cutting through silence. I'd seen that kind of look before, between men who had already agreed on what the truth would be. Annalise uncrossed her arms just long enough to smirk. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Cora. You always liked drama. I have every right to see that will, I said, turning to the lawyer, and I will not be dismissed in front of people mourning a woman who loved me more than she ever loved this circus of a family. It was loud. It echoed. The minister whispered something to his assistant. A few guests awkwardly shuffled toward the exits. My mother leaned in and hissed my name under her breath. But here's the thing I almost missed. When Valora reached out and touched my arm, just for a second, I saw something in her eyes. Not pity, fear, real, trembling fear. Then she pulled her hand back, and the mask returned. I walked out of that suffocating chapel before they could drag me into the next act of their rehearsed betrayal. Outside, rain was falling. Soft, steady. I stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, mascara running, and that's when I noticed it. A black sedan parked across the street. Dark windows. Someone inside. I figured it was paparazzi, or a late mourner. I didn't think about it again. Not then. The rain hadn't stopped by the time I slid into the corner booth at Harrow's Diner. Bryn Calloway was already there, my best friend since middle school, red hair pulled into a messy knot, eyes sharp as always. The waitress didn't bother asking what we wanted. She brought 2 slices of apple pie with extra whipped cream and refilled our coffees like clockwork. I didn't touch mine. They looked relieved, I muttered, tracing circles in the condensation on my water glass. Not sad, not even surprised, just satisfied, like they pulled it off. Bryn leaned forward. Because they did pull it off, Cora. You saw the way your dad and that lawyer looked at each other. That was rehearsed. I swallowed hard. She told me she was leaving everything to me, not once, repeatedly. She said I was the only one she trusted not to sell off her legacy like a yard sale. Bryn rested her hand on mine, and she meant it, but something changed, and it wasn't her heart. A beat passed. Then I whispered it. What if they forged it? Bryn didn't flinch. I wouldn't put it past them. Your dad's got a history of shady deals, and Annalise is a corporate lawyer. She knows how to make paperwork look clean on the surface. I stared out the rain-specked window, watching drops race each other down the glass like little desperate things trying to reach the ledge first. The house, I said. Why give me the house? Bryn's eyes narrowed. Because they didn't want it, or because it's the one thing they couldn't bury. Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. I told her about the last time I sat with my grandmother on the porch. Sweet tea, sunset over the marsh, the air thick with magnolia and salt. Grandma Eleanor had turned to me with that look she got when she was about to say something that mattered. One day, Cora, you'll need to walk through something dark. When you do, don't just look for a light. Look for the match I left you. Bryn's lips parted. You think she meant... I don't know, but she never spoke in riddles without a reason. There's something you should know about Bryn. She wasn't just my friend. She'd grown up in the foster system before being adopted at 12. She understood what it meant to have family betray you, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. That's why she didn't hesitate when I said, "Come with me, tomorrow. I'll get the keys from the lawyer's office and we'll go to the house. Just you and me." She squeezed my hand across the table. "I'll bring gloves," she said, "and a flashlight." Outside, the rain kept falling. But for the first time in days, something inside me stopped sinking. I didn't know what I'd find in that crumbling house on Wexley Hill, but I knew who'd be standing beside me when I opened the door. The house had been dying quietly for years. At first, I thought I could just sweep the floors, repaint the walls, maybe replace some siding. What I didn't expect was for the basement to flood the first time it rained, or for a family of raccoons to be living in the attic insulation, or the slow, gutting realization that the structure had been neglected just long enough to require almost everything short of demolition. But I didn't walk away. I pulled on work gloves. I learned to wield a crowbar. I watched renovation tutorials at midnight on YouTube, long 2-hour videos by patient Southern men explaining how to tell rotted wood from salvageable beams. I rented tools I couldn't name 3 months earlier: floor sanders, tile cutters, laser levels. Every weekend, I drove out to that old colonial, opened the swollen front door with a creak that sounded like a ghost's exhale, and worked until my back gave out or the sun dipped too low behind the trees. I had a new routine. Every morning before I started, I'd stand in the middle of the empty room, close my eyes, and try to remember the sound of Grandma Eleanor singing in the kitchen. She wasn't a good singer, low voice, always offbeat, but she sang like the house was listening. The house became my church, my rebellion, my quiet war. At Sunday dinner, they mocked me. "You should sell it," my mother sniffed. "Or let it collapse and build something livable," Annalise added, not looking up from her wine glass. "That place will fall apart before it earns a dime." My father laughed. "Maybe we should have left you the boat instead." I placed my fork on my napkin, calm as still water. I'd rather restore something honest than live off lies. The table went silent. For once, nobody had a comeback. After that night, I stopped updating them altogether. But here's what they didn't know. And here's what I need you to understand, because this is where it got real. I was going broke. I used every dollar of my savings on materials. I sold Grandma's old Buick to cover the cost of a new roof. I started showing up late to work, missing deadlines. My editor gave me 2 warnings, then 3. Emmett, my husband, a freelance carpenter, supported me, but the worry was eating at him. "I'm with you," he said one night, standing in the doorway of our rental, sawdust still in his hair. "But we can't keep burning money on a house you're not even sure you want to keep." He wasn't wrong, and that's what made it worse. I couldn't explain to him, or to anyone, why I couldn't stop. It wasn't logic. It was something deeper, something in my bones that said, "She hid something in those walls. Keep going, hey." Then came Silas Whitmore. "Lakeside Restorations," his voicemail said. "We bring the bones back to life." He looked like someone who could have played rhythm guitar in a 90s garage band. Faded flannel, crow's feet from sun squints, hands permanently stained with varnish. A Navy veteran who talked straight and didn't waste words. He stepped over a pile of cracked tile and looked around. "You do the demo yourself?" I nodded. Damn, respect. Most people would have quit at the smell alone. He offered a fair bid. Said it would be tight, but doable. I signed with him the next day, and for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't carrying the house alone. His crew was small, quiet, careful men who whistled while they worked and treated the place like it mattered. We started finding things: a broken pocket watch behind a wall, a silver hairpin under the floorboards, a yellowed recipe card for apple cake tucked into the chimney masonry. Nothing important on its own. But I saved them all like relics, as if they might whisper something she'd forgotten to say. Then, one afternoon, while moving an old mirror in the master bedroom, a small photograph slipped from behind the frame. In it, my grandmother, much younger, maybe 40, was laughing beside a man I'd never seen. On the back, in small handwriting, G.L., September 1992. I put it in my keepsake box without thinking much about it. Just an old friend, I told myself. I also found her diary, a small, leather-bound journal wedged between the wall and a wardrobe in the upstairs hallway. Most of it was mundane: recipes, garden schedules, weather observations. But scattered through the pages were entries that felt coded. She mentioned G.L. with affection, but always tinged with sadness. G.L. was right. I can't keep pretending, but if they find out, they'll use it to destroy me. One entry from 1998 stopped me cold. Valora asked why Cora's eyes don't look like anyone in the family. I told her genetics are strange things, but the truth is stranger than genetics. I didn't understand it then. I photographed every page and sent them to Bryn. By month 7, things had shifted. The walls were plastered, primed, and waiting for paint. I was sleeping better, smiling more. It wasn't healing exactly, but it was something like peace. Until the call. It was a Wednesday, late spring. I was at work eating lunch in the parking lot when my phone rang. "Cora." Silas's voice was low and clipped. "You need to get out here, right now." I sat up. Did something collapse? Is it mold? No, nothing like that. A pause. "But don't tell your parents or your sister. You hear me?" "What? Why?" "Cora." He rarely used my first name. "Just get out here. Bring your keys." He hung up. I sat there staring at the black screen for a full minute. Then my heart began to pound. I left my office without a word, ignored my manager's raised brow, drove through every light that turned yellow a second too early. When I turned the corner onto Wexley Hill, I slammed the brakes. 3 squad cars, parked crooked, flashing lights. Yellow tape stretched from the old oak tree to the porch railing. No fire, no visible damage. But this wasn't a code violation. My legs felt like wires pulled too tight as I stepped out of the car. A uniformed officer intercepted me on the front walk. "Name, please?" "Cora Phillips. I own the property." Silas met me in the foyer. No smirk, no small talk. Just a furrowed brow and dust smudged across his jaw. "One of my guys found airflow where there shouldn't be any," he said. "Behind the hearth. We thought rodents. But when we pulled the bricks above the fireplace, we found a false back, a hidden alcove." He led me to it, then he stopped. "You told me your grandma trusted you." I nodded slowly. "With everything." "Then I think she left this for you." He stepped aside. My breath caught. Behind the bricks, nestled in a space that hadn't seen light in decades, was a wooden chest. Dark cherry wood, brass corners dulled with age. The lock, rusted, had already popped open. On the underside of the lid, carved with a small blade in handwriting that trembled but never wavered, E.J.P. Eleanor Jane Phillips. I touched each letter, felt the depth of the carving under my fingertips, and suddenly, she was there. Not a ghost, but a will. Alive, stubborn, refusing to be buried. Silas crouched beside me. I didn't open it. That's not for me. I lifted the lid. My hands shook. On top, a thick, cream-colored envelope, dry with age. Across the front, in her unmistakable looping script, for Cora only. I broke the seal, unfolded the letter. The ink had faded in places, but her handwriting was still clear, neat, deliberate, slightly slanted from her arthritic hand. My sweet Cora, if you're reading this, then the people around you have already made you feel alone. I am so sorry. I wanted to protect you in life, but what I couldn't say then, I've written now. There are things about our family I tried for years to deny. I hoped love and time could fix them. But time doesn't change some people. It just teaches them how to lie better. Arden and Valora have been draining money from the family business for over 23 years. Quietly, systematically, hidden through offshore accounts and shell companies. I only discovered it after your grandfather passed. When I confronted them, your father told me to stay in my lane. He even tried to have me declared mentally unfit, said I was confused. But I was never confused about you. You were the only one who saw me, who never flinched when I told the truth. That's why I left you the house. I couldn't trust the others. But I knew if something happened, you'd come looking. In this chest, you'll find ledgers, wire transfers, shell company names, account numbers. Use them, Cora. Not to destroy, but to stop them. And if you ever wonder whether you're strong enough, remember, strength runs in your blood, but so does truth. One more thing. There's someone I trusted besides you. If you need help, find GL. I never forgot him, and he never stopped watching. All my love, Grandma. By the time I finished, tears had blurred the last line. Beneath the letter, meticulously kept ledgers wrapped in cloth, folders labeled with foreign bank names, printed wire transfers, and a small black notebook, every page filled with annotations in her tidy script. Raymond Eckhart arrived within the hour. He leafed through a few pages and let out a low breath. This is substantial, but it was what lay at the very bottom of the chest that changed everything. A second will, dated later than the one read at the funeral, signed by Eleanor, witnessed by two people whose names I didn't recognize. This will left everything, the company, the accounts, the ring, all of it, to me, which meant the will they read at the funeral might be a forgery. I looked at Silas, then at the officer standing nearby, then at the letter still trembling in my hands. She knew, I whispered. She knew they'd come for me, and she buried the truth in the one place they'd never think to look, because they never thought I'd fight hard enough to find it. Silas put a hand on my shoulder. Whatever's in there, it's already changing things, so be careful. Don't tell anyone you don't trust, and whatever you do, don't leave this house alone tonight. Outside, through the dusty window, I could see the driveway, and beyond it, parked just past the tree line, a black sedan with tinted windows, the same one from the funeral. They thought giving me a crumbling house would keep me quiet. They didn't know my grandmother had turned that house into a loaded gun, and I had just pulled the trigger. The morning after we opened the chest, I sat in Raymond Eckhart's office with a fireproof bag on my lap and the taste of cold coffee on my tongue. I hadn't slept. My eyes burned from staring at my grandmother's handwriting until the letters blurred into shapes that looked like prayers. Emmett had driven me. I didn't trust my own hands on the wheel. Raymond spent 3 hours with the documents. He wore cotton gloves, turning each page like it might dissolve if he breathed too hard. The office was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner and the soft sounds he made under his breath, the kind a doctor makes when he finds something on an X-ray he hoped wasn't there. "Shell companies," he said at last, not looking up. "Cayman accounts. Wire transfers routed through Luxembourg, then back through a consulting firm in Delaware that, from what I can tell, has no employees, no office, and no function other than laundering money. He set down the ledger and removed his glasses, pressing his fingers against the bridge of his nose. Some of these transfers are recent, Cora. Within the last 18 months. Your father was still moving money after your grandmother died. And the second will? I asked. He opened the folder containing both documents, the one read at the funeral and the one we'd found at the bottom of the chest. He placed them side by side. If the second will holds up under forensic handwriting analysis, and based on what I'm seeing, it should, it invalidates the first entirely. This will leave everything to you, the company, the accounts, the properties, everything. So, we file. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses with the expression of a man who has spent 40 years watching people walk into storms they didn't understand. We file, but carefully. I'll submit a formal challenge to the probate court and simultaneously refer the financial evidence to the Federal Crimes Unit. He paused, choosing his next words like a man stepping across stones in a river. Cora, you need to understand. The moment we do this, your family will know, and people with this much to lose do not sit quietly. I know. Do you? He leaned forward. Because what I'm seeing in these ledgers isn't a family squabble over an inheritance. This is 23 years of systematic fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, tax evasion. People go to federal prison for this, and people with money and power, they don't go gently. They go to war. I thought of my grandmother, her arthritic hands, her unforgiving penmanship, the years she must have spent collecting this evidence in secret while sitting across the dinner table from the people who were robbing her. She didn't go gently either. File it, I said, quietly. Let them stay comfortable a little longer. He leaned back. That may be the most dangerous thing you've said all day. I left his office that afternoon with copies secured in a second fireproof bag, a burner phone in my jacket pocket that Bryn had insisted I buy, and a quiet fire burning in my chest. It wasn't grief anymore. It was purpose. Hard and bright and terrifying. But they weren't going to give me peace. Not even a week of it. On Tuesday, 5 days after we filed, my editor called me into his office. He closed the door, which he never did. He wouldn't meet my eyes, which told me everything before he opened his mouth. Cora, this isn't easy. We've noticed a pattern. Late arrivals, missed deadlines, distracted work. I've given you warnings, more than I should have. I know I've had a family emergency that's been... I understand. He slid a folder across the desk. Severance paperwork, my name printed neatly at the top, like a headstone. The decision's been made. I'm sorry. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the document. I knew what this was. My father was a major donor to the media group that owned the paper. Not a controlling shareholder, but the kind of benefactor whose name appeared on plaques in the lobby and whose calls the publisher always took. Arden didn't need to make a direct phone call to get me fired. He just needed to have built enough goodwill over the years that a quiet suggestion, "My daughter's been under a lot of stress, maybe a change would do her good," would land like gospel. I signed the papers, packed a box of things I didn't care about, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, going nowhere. The woman who'd spent 7 years building a career at that paper, she was gone. Just like that. Another thing they'd reached in and removed, clean as surgery. On Thursday, my bank called. My accounts had been frozen. Under investigation, the representative said in that polished, apologetic tone that means I can't tell you anything and I wouldn't if I could. No details. No timeline. Every dollar I had, which by that point wasn't much, locked behind a wall I couldn't see or climb. I couldn't pay rent, couldn't pay utilities, couldn't buy groceries without dipping into the emergency fund that Emmett and I had spent 2 years building. The money we'd been saving for a down payment on our own home, the one we'd circled in real estate listings on Sunday mornings, the one we'd argued over paint colors for like it already existed. Emmett didn't say anything when I told him. He just nodded, opened his laptop, transferred the savings into checking, made dinner, pasta with garlic bread, the meal he always made when things were bad, as if carbohydrates could absorb grief. But that night, after I thought he'd fallen asleep, I heard him in the kitchen, the faucet running longer than it needed to, a glass set down too hard on the counter. I came around the corner and found him leaning against the sink, eyes closed, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. "Em." He opened his eyes. "I'm fine." "You're not." Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the ceiling like a searchlight. "Do you think about us, Cora?" His voice was steady, exhausted, the voice of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and could feel his knees starting to buckle. "About what this is costing. Not just money. Us. You and me. The life we were building. Every single day. Because I'm with you. You know I am. But we're bleeding out. The savings are gone. Your job is gone. You don't eat. You don't sleep. I watch you disappear into those documents every night like you're climbing into a grave, and I don't know how to reach you anymore." He paused. "I don't know where you go." It would have been easier if he'd yelled, easier if he'd thrown something or slammed a door. But Emmett never raised his voice. He just told the truth, steady and bare, and let it stand in the room between us like furniture neither of us could move. "I can't stop," I whispered. "Not after what she left me." "Not now." "I know." He looked at me. "That's what scares me." We stood in the kitchen, 2 feet apart, and I felt the distance like a physical thing. Not anger, not betrayal, but the slow widening of a crack that nobody meant to make. I wanted to cross it. I wanted to tell him everything would be fine. But I'd made a promise to myself after I read my grandmother's letter. No more lies, not even the kind ones. Guys. At 11:47 that night, my phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. 4 words that changed the direction of everything. "Be careful with Annalise." I ran the number through every reverse lookup I could find. It was registered to a woman named Dorothy Marsh, a former assistant of my mother's who had left the company 3 years ago. The circumstances of her departure were murky. Valora had described it as a mutual decision. Dorothy had never spoken publicly about it. I didn't know if this was a trap, bait thrown out to see how I'd react, or a genuine warning from someone who'd been watching and waiting for the right moment to speak. But it planted something in me, a question I couldn't let go of. Was Valora not entirely on Arden's side? Had she sent this through Dorothy, or had Dorothy sent it on her own? A woman who'd seen something during her years inside the machine and had been carrying it in silence ever since. I showed Bryn. She studied the message for a long time, turning her phone over in her hands like it was a puzzle box. "Could be bait," she said. "Could also be the first honest thing anyone in your family's orbit has said in years." Should I respond? No, but watch Annalise, closer than the others. Because whoever sent this knows something specific, and they're more afraid of your sister than your father. That last line stayed with me. More afraid of Annalise than Arden. I'd always thought of my sister as the supporting player, sharp, ambitious, but ultimately following our father's lead. What if I'd been wrong? What if she wasn't the follower at all? 3 weeks after filing, they took my car. I'd parked outside the municipal building, broad daylight downtown, meters lined with SUVs and sedans. I was inside for 40 minutes, picking up certified copies of the probate challenge. When I walked out, the spot was empty, a dry rectangle of pavement where a car used to be, like a missing tooth in a smile. Not towed, not booted, not ticketed, just gone. Vanished in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon on a busy street like it had never existed. The officer who came was polite, thorough, and ultimately useless. He tapped notes into his tablet, asked all the right questions, and promised to request surveillance footage from the traffic cameras on that block. 2 days later, a different officer called. "I'm sorry, Miss Phillips. The footage from that block is unavailable, corrupted during a routine software update." "Corrupted?" "Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, it happens." "And there's no backup?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Not in this case." I hung up and walked into my bathroom, turned on the faucet, splashed water on my face like that would slow the tightening spiral. Then I gripped the sink and stared at my own reflection, this woman with dark circles under her eyes and a jaw set hard enough to crack, and I understood what they were doing. This was never about the car. It was a message, a demonstration. They were telling me, we can touch anything, we can reach anywhere, we can make things disappear, in broad daylight on a busy street, and nobody will ask questions. Now imagine what we can do when no one's watching. Then Raymond called, and I knew, from the first syllable, from the way his breath caught before he spoke, that I was about to lose another wall. "I've been threatened, Cora." My body went cold. "I can't prove it in court. No phone calls, no emails, just a letter, typed, unsigned, slipped under my front door sometime during the night. And this morning—" His voice wavered, and I realized I had never heard Raymond Eckhart's voice waver in the entire time I'd known him. "My tires, all four, slashed in my driveway, at my home, Cora, where my grandchildren play." I could hear him breathing. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in his office, the same clock that had marked the hours while he'd read my grandmother's ledgers. "You're pulling out," I said. Not a question. "I've emailed you a list of referrals, colleagues I trust. One of them, Nora Prescott. She's the best I know. Federal fraud cases, whistleblower protections, organized financial crime. She doesn't intimidate." A long breath. "But I can't continue. My daughter asked me to stop. My wife won't sleep." "I'm sorry, Cora. I'm so sorry." I didn't blame him. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Because anger was easier than fear, and losing Raymond felt like losing the last adult in the room. But I couldn't, because I knew what it meant to have someone threaten the people you love. And I knew that Raymond Eckhart wasn't a coward. He was a 67-year-old man who had devoted his career to the law and was now learning what I had already learned, that the law only works when the people enforcing it aren't for sale. "It's okay," I said. The biggest lie I'd told since this started. "I understand." After we hung up, I sat on the floor, knees drawn to my chest, back against the wall, heart beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The apartment was silent. Emmett was at a job site. Bryn was in class. The documents were spread across the kitchen table like a map of a country no one wanted to visit. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. And for the first time since the funeral, I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe the truth isn't enough when the people you're fighting can buy the locks and the keys and the judges and the silence. Then I looked at the table, at my grandmother's black notebook, sitting open to a page I'd bookmarked. Her handwriting, neat, fierce, unapologetic. A single line underscored twice. "They will try to make you feel small. Don't let them. You are the only honest thing left." I picked up my phone, dialed Bryn. She answered before the second ring. "You okay?" "No," I said. "They took my car. My lawyer quit. My bank account is frozen. The police can't help, or won't." Her breath caught. 1 second. 2. Then her voice sharpened like a blade being drawn. "Okay. Then it's my turn." "What do you mean?" "You forget I'm finishing law school in 6 weeks. I may not be licensed yet, but I know how to dig, and I know how to build a case, and I am not afraid of your family." "Bryn, you'd be risking everything. Your career before it even starts." There was steel in her voice when she answered. "Then let's make sure it's worth it." And then came the morning that broke me open in a way I will never fully recover from. It was a Tuesday. I'd been up since 4, cross-referencing dates in the ledgers with public filings, trying to build a timeline that would hold up under scrutiny. I hadn't eaten anything solid in 2 days. 3 nights of 2-hour sleep had blurred the edges of everything. The documents swam, the numbers melted into each other, and I kept losing my place in sentences I'd already read 6 times. My body had been sending me signals for days. The nausea I blamed on stress. The dizziness I blamed on dehydration. The low ache in my abdomen that I pushed down and pushed down and pushed down because there wasn't time for it, because the filing deadline was Thursday, because if I stopped, even for a day, I was afraid I'd never start again. I collapsed in the bathroom at 6:14 in the morning. One moment I was standing at the sink, the next I was on the floor, tile cold against my cheek, and there was blood, and I was screaming Emmett's name before I understood what was happening. At the emergency room, the doctor spoke in that measured, clinical tone they train for in medical school, the voice that means the news will change the shape of your life. Spontaneous miscarriage, he said. Approximately 4 weeks. 4 weeks. I hadn't known, hadn't suspected. My body, pushed past every reasonable limit by grief and stress and sleeplessness and rage, had made a decision I never got to make. The doctor called it spontaneous, as if my body had simply chosen on its own, as if the months of war I'd been waging against my own family had nothing to do with it. Emmett sat beside my hospital bed. His hand held mine, and I could feel it trembling, a faint, unsteady vibration, like a wire humming in wind. His face was the color of the hospital walls. He didn't cry. Not in front of me. Not in front of the nurses who came in and out with their soft shoes and careful eyes. When we got home, he made soup, pulled a blanket around my shoulders on the couch, kissed my forehead, a long, slow kiss, like he was trying to seal something shut. Then he went out to the back steps and sat alone in the dark. I watched him through the kitchen window, his shoulders shaking, his hands covering his face. He was crying for the child we'd never gotten to name. And he was crying because he didn't know how to say the thing that had been eating him alive for weeks. I'm losing you, piece by piece, day by day, to that house and those documents and your grandmother's ghost, and I don't know how to compete with the dead. The next morning, he stood in the kitchen doorway while I sat at the table, staring at nothing. I'm not leaving, he said. I need you to hear that first. I'm not leaving. I nodded. But you need to know. The thing you're fighting, it's taking more than you realize. It took your job. It took our savings. It took... His voice caught. He pressed his lips together, steadied himself. It's taking pieces of you that I don't know how to put back. I looked up at him. This man who had married me in a backyard ceremony, who built furniture with his hands and sang off key in the shower and had never once asked me to be smaller than I was. He deserved better than what I was giving him. He deserved a wife who slept through the night and ate 3 meals a day and didn't stare at financial ledgers at midnight like a woman possessed. I know, I said, and I'm sorry, but I can't stop. He nodded slowly. Then he said the thing that cracked my heart clean in two. I know you can't. I just wish she hadn't asked you to. He meant my grandmother, and for the first time I let myself wonder, did she know? When she hid that chest behind the fireplace and wrote my name on that envelope, did she know what it would cost me? Did she calculate the price and decide I could afford it? Or did she simply trust me the way she trusted truth, absolutely and without counting the damage? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. See? But I kept going, because Nora Prescott found the crack that broke everything open. She took the case within 24 hours of reviewing the files. Small, fierce, dark hair cropped close to her skull, with the quiet intensity of a woman who'd spent her career going after men in corner offices who believed the rules didn't apply to them. She didn't make promises. She didn't comfort. She just read every page, asked precise questions, and said, I'll take it, but you need to be prepared for what comes next. What came next was the forensic handwriting analysis. She'd sent both wills, the one from the funeral and the one from the chest, to a certified document examiner. The results came back in 12 days, and they were unambiguous. The signature on the funeral will was copied, traced from an original sample. Convincing enough to pass a cursory review, but under magnification, the strokes revealed hesitation patterns inconsistent with natural handwriting. Someone had physically replicated my grandmother's signature, stroke by careful stroke, onto a document she had never signed. That tells us the will was forged, Nora said, but it doesn't tell us by whom. She opened her laptop. This does. The notarization on the forged will had been processed through a firm called Whitfield and Associates, a small office in Cambridge that handled routine legal certifications. Annalise had interned there during her second year of law school. The 2 witnesses who'd signed the will were former colleagues of hers from that same firm. Your sister didn't just benefit from the fraud, Nora said, watching my face with the careful attention of someone delivering a diagnosis. She orchestrated it. She drafted the replacement will. She selected the notary. She arranged the witnesses. And she did it with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and exactly how to make it look legitimate. She turned the laptop toward me. An email on screen. From Annalise's personal account to our father, dated 2 months before my grandmother died. She signed the new will last week. We need to act before it gets registered. I've prepared the replacement. She'll get the house, enough to look legitimate, not enough to cause problems. I read it once, twice, a third time. The words didn't change. They just got heavier. My sister, who'd borrowed my clothes in high school, who'd taught me how to apply eyeliner in the bathroom mirror, who'd held my hand at our grandfather's funeral and whispered, "At least we still have Grandma." That woman, that person I'd once trusted with my smallest, most unguarded self, had sat down at a computer, opened a blank document, and deliberately rewritten my grandmother's dying wishes to steal everything she'd left me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt hollow, as if the floor had simply vanished and I was falling through an endless, silent space where nothing could reach me. Then Nora showed me the other email, the one that made everything more complicated, because it made Annalise human. It was sent to a personal address, not Arden, not Valora, someone else entirely. I know this is wrong, but if I don't do it, he'll find someone else, and whoever he finds won't leave Cora anything at all. At least this way, she gets the house. At least this way, she has something. I sat with that for a long time. She hadn't done it purely out of malice. She'd done it out of cowardice, dressed in the clothing of mercy. She'd told herself that giving me crumbs was better than letting someone else give me nothing. She'd rationalized betrayal as protection, the way people do when they're too afraid to fight, but too guilty to look away entirely. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake for nights afterward, was that I understood. I hated that I understood, but I did, because I'd spent my whole life watching Annalise navigate our father's expectations, watching her twist herself into whatever shape would earn his approval, watching her become the version of herself that he demanded. Polished, strategic, obedient. She wasn't born a villain. She was made into one, slowly, over decades, by a man who treated loyalty like currency and love like leverage. That didn't make it forgivable. It just made it tragic. The counterfiling arrived 3 days before the hearing. Arden's legal team, a Boston firm with marble floors and more partners than principals, accused me of defamation, fraud, falsification of documents, and conspiracy to extort. The document was 214 pages long. It painted me as an unstable, grief-stricken woman who had fabricated evidence to steal her family's wealth. The night before the hearing, Bryn sat at my kitchen table until 3 in the morning. Nora called at midnight with final instructions. Bryn moved through the ledgers with a focus that bordered on obsession, highlighting, flagging, cross-referencing. And I realized she wasn't just doing this for me. She was doing it for every foster kid who'd been told their voice didn't matter, every girl who'd been handed a lie and told it was love. They built this case on fear, she said at one point, not looking up. Fear that nobody would believe you. Fear that you'd give up and walk away. She raised her eyes. Not anymore. Around midnight, Emmett came downstairs. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. The papers, the coffee cups, the 2 women who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Then he walked over, stood behind my chair, and wrapped his arms around me. His chin rested on top of my head. I felt his heartbeat against my back. Steady now, not trembling, not afraid, just present. "I'm sorry I doubted," he said quietly. "I see it now. This isn't about the house. It's about her." I turned and pressed my forehead into his chest. "It's about all of us." He kissed my hair. Then he went to the kitchen, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat down beside Bryn to help sort documents. He didn't understand the legal terminology. He couldn't follow half the financial trails. But he was there, and that night, in that kitchen, surrounded by evidence of everything my family had broken, His presence was the one thing that still felt unbreakable. At 4 in the morning, I stood at the window. The street was dark and empty except for one thing: the black sedan parked across the road, engine off, windows tinted so dark they looked painted shut. It had been there at the funeral, outside the municipal building the day my car disappeared, parked at the edge of the tree line the day we found the chest. And now here, on the night before the hearing, like a shadow that had been following me for months. I didn't look away. I stared at it, and a thought rose in me that I couldn't quite explain. A feeling more than a word. That car isn't here to threaten me. It's here to watch, to wait, to make sure I get to the courtroom. But watching for whom? Nora called at 6. Ready? I looked at the evidence on my table, at Bryn, asleep on the couch with a highlighter still in her hand, at Emmett, rinsing cups at the sink, flour in his hair from yesterday's baking. I don't know, I said, but I'm not stopping. I walked into that courtroom believing the truth would protect me. I didn't know they'd already bought the judge, and that the coldest metal I'd ever feel wouldn't be my grandmother's brass chest, but the handcuffs locking shut around my wrists while my parents watched without blinking. The courthouse was colder than it should have been. Marble floors, fluorescent lights that hummed like they were trying to warn you. The sharp echo of heels clicking down the corridor, mine, Nora's, and behind us, Bryn's, walking fast to keep up. My parents were already seated when we entered the courtroom. Valora wore a soft, dove-gray suit, understated, elegant, the kind of outfit a woman wears when she wants the jury to think she gardens on weekends and donates to children's hospitals. Arden sat beside her, arms folded across his chest, face arranged into an expression of bored patience, like a man waiting for a delayed flight he fully expects to board. Annalise's chair was empty. Her absence didn't comfort me. It made every nerve in my body stand on edge. Annalise never missed an opportunity to be seen. If she wasn't here, it meant she was somewhere else, doing something she didn't want witnesses for. Judge Harlan Voss entered from a side door. Silver hair, thin lips, eyes that scanned the courtroom the way a butcher scans a carcass, looking for the most efficient place to cut. Bryn had warned me about his reputation. Brilliant on procedural law, suspicious of whistleblowers, known to favor defendants with expensive attorneys. He won't be on our side, she'd said. We need the evidence to be so overwhelming he can't look away. He settled behind the bench and opened the file without greeting anyone. Miss Phillips, he said, flipping through pages. You've brought accusations of financial misconduct, embezzlement, fraud, and will falsification against your parents. These are serious charges. Nora stepped forward. Her voice was calm, precise, stripped of anything that could be mistaken for emotion. She laid out the case the way a surgeon lays out instruments. Each piece of evidence placed exactly where it needed to be. The ledgers, the wire transfers, the shell companies, the 2 wills, the forensic handwriting analysis, the emails proving Annalise had orchestrated the forgery. I was called to the stand. My hands trembled, but my voice held. My grandmother discovered something my family wanted hidden, I said. She spent years documenting it, alone, afraid, surrounded by people who tried to have her declared mentally unfit when she got too close to the truth. She couldn't fight them while she was alive, so she left the evidence for me. She trusted me, and I'm here because no one else would speak for her. Voss watched me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he closed the folder, slowly, deliberately, the way you close a book you've already decided isn't worth finishing. The court has reviewed the submitted documents, he said. However, the word landed like a stone in still water. We also received a formal counterclaim this morning from the defendants, alleging defamation, fraud, falsified evidence, and conspiracy to extort. My stomach dropped. I've examined both filings. He folded his hands. And I find the plaintiff's case, however emotionally compelling, legally insufficient to proceed. The provenance of the documents is unverified. The chain of custody is questionable. The forensic analysis was conducted by a private firm without court appointment. Nora was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, the chain of custody is documented. The forensic examiner is certified by the American Board of... He silenced her with a look that could have frozen a river. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendants," he said. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with charges of defamation and fraudulent misrepresentation against Cora Phillips. He turned to the bailiff. "Detain Miss Phillips for processing." The courtroom tilted. Sounds became distant, like hearing the world through water. I saw Nora's mouth moving but couldn't make out the words. I saw Bryn rising from her seat in the gallery, face white, both hands gripping the rail in front of her. The bailiff approached. "Turn around, ma'am." "This isn't legal," I said. "I have proof. Verified, documented proof." "Turn around, please." The handcuffs closed around my wrists. Cold. Heavy. The metal bit into my skin, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way a dam cracks before the water comes through. I looked over my shoulder. My parents sat exactly as they had when I'd walked in. Arden's chin slightly raised. Valora's hands folded in her lap. Neither of them flinched. Neither of them looked away. They watched me being handcuffed in the courtroom of a judge they'd bought, and their faces held the same expression. This is what happens when you don't know your place. I locked eyes with Bryn. "They rigged it," I whispered. "Everything." Her voice shook, but her words didn't. "This isn't over. I swear to you, Cora, this is not over." And then the doors exploded open. Not figuratively. The double doors at the back of the courtroom slammed inward with a sound that cracked through the marble chamber like a gunshot. A rush of corridor air swept through the room, cold, sharp, carrying the scent of paper and floor cleaner and something else entirely. Authority. Every head turned. Every voice stopped. The bailiff's hand froze on my arm. 6 people in dark suits walked in. 2 rows of 3, shoulders straight, steps synchronized, moving with the coordinated precision of people who had rehearsed this moment, not theatrically, but operationally. They didn't look at the gallery. They didn't acknowledge the lawyers. Their eyes were fixed on one point in the room, the bench. The man in front was in his 70s, silver-haired, straight-backed, with the steady gaze of someone who had spent decades looking at the worst of humanity and had learned to do it without blinking. He held up a badge as he walked, the metal catching the fluorescent light. "Judge Harlan Voss." His voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. "You are under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to suppress a federal investigation." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, movement, chairs scraping against marble. Somewhere behind me, a woman said, "Oh my God," in a voice that sounded like prayer. Voss actually laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. "You have no jurisdiction in my courtroom." The agent didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "We do now, Your Honor. The Department of Justice issued a warrant at 6 o'clock this morning. We have documented wire transfers linking you to the Phillips family. We have testimony from 3 former clerks. And we have recordings, made over the last 27 months, of phone conversations in which you discussed case outcomes with Arden Phillips before proceedings began." He paused. "Step down from the bench." Voss stood. His hands were trembling. Not with fear, but with the particular rage of a man who has held power for so long that the concept of accountability feels like a personal insult. "I want my counsel." "You'll get one. But first, you'll answer for what you've buried in this courtroom." 2 agents moved behind the bench. In seconds, fewer seconds than it had taken to put cuffs on me, Voss's arms were behind his back, locked in the same metal that was still biting into my wrists. Valora stood up fast. "There's been a mistake." The lead agent turned to her. Not fast, not aggressive, just certain. "Valora Phillips, please remain seated. We'll be speaking with you next." She froze, mid-step, mid-breath. For one moment, the mask cracked entirely, and I saw the face beneath it. Not the composed society wife, not the elegant co-conspirator, but a woman who had just realized that the walls she'd spent decades building were made of paper. Arden reached for her arm and guided her back into the seat. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved across the room, calculating, assessing, looking for exits that didn't exist. The bailiff released my arm like I'd become radioactive. The cuffs were still on. I stood in the middle of the courtroom, shackled and forgotten, heart pounding so hard I could feel it behind my teeth. The lead agent finally looked at me, and something in his face shifted. Not professionally, but personally. Something old and deep and quiet. "Cora Phillips?" I nodded. "I need to speak with you, privately." A pause, then softer. "I've waited a long time for this." He turned to the bailiff. "Remove the cuffs." The metal slid off with a click. I stood there rubbing my wrists, staring at the red marks on my skin, trying to understand what had just happened. Bryn appeared beside me, gripping my arm. "Did that just—" "Yeah. Cora." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I think your grandmother left more than just paperwork." He drove me to a small cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. Quiet, warm, the kind of place where people came to read newspapers and forget about the world. A single couple sat in the back, sipping iced tea. The waitress recognized him and nodded. He led me to a corner booth, sat across from me, folded his hands on the table. "Coffee?" he asked. "Who are you?" A soft smile. Not practiced, not strategic, tired, real. "Agent Garrett Langford, FBI Financial Crimes Division, officially." He paused. "Unofficially, I was your grandmother's lover." The words didn't land right away. They floated in the air between us like something spoken in a language I was still learning. "I met Eleanor Jane Phillips in 1992, he continued. His voice was low and steady. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this confession not for performance, but for accuracy. "She was married. I was too. It wasn't about stealing each other away. We were both drowning, in different oceans, but drowning all the same. And we found each other the way drowning people do. Desperately, gratefully, and with the full knowledge that it couldn't last." He looked down at the table, then back at me. I noticed his eyes. Blue-gray, the same shade I saw in my own mirror every morning. The same shade I'd never been able to explain. "She ended it after 6 months. Said she couldn't risk dragging anyone else into the family's mess, but we stayed in contact. She'd call, ask questions about tax codes, offshore structures, shell company regulations. I didn't press. I knew she was building something." "You were watching her," I said. "Yes. And later, watching you." The waitress set down 2 coffees. Neither of us touched them. "About a year ago," he said. "She sent me a sealed file, along with a letter. She said if anything happened, if the will looked wrong, if the house went to you and only the house, I'd know it was time to move." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Cream-colored, faded. I recognized the paper immediately. The same stock she'd used for my letter in the chest. "She told me not to give you this unless you made it far enough on your own," he said. "She needed to know you were strong enough." I took it, broke the seal. Inside, a single index card. Her handwriting. "If he brings you this, you've done what I couldn't. Trust him, and ask him what he never told me." I looked up. "What didn't you tell her?" His eyes held mine for a long time. The cafe noise, the clink of spoons, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of the couple in the back, faded until there was nothing but his voice and the space between us. "She asked me once if the law would protect you after she was gone." He paused. I didn't answer, because I knew then what I know now. The law doesn't always protect people like her, or girls like you. Not when power is passed down like property deeds and justice is something you have to buy at market price. He reached into his pocket again, a worn photograph, edges soft from years of handling. In it, my grandmother. Young, laughing, and beside her, his hand resting on her back, the same photograph I'd found behind the mirror in the master bedroom. The same man. G.L. September 1992. "I'm not just someone who's helping you, Cora," he said, his voice thickened. "Your family." I stared at him, at the line of his jaw, the shape of his brow, the way his forehead creased when he was holding something back. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of me and Emmett from the week before, zoomed in on my face. My nose, I said. My eyes, the way the brow creases. He looked, exhaled, long and slow, like a man setting down something he'd carried for decades. I always suspected, he said. She never said it outright, never claimed anything, but the timeline, and the way she protected you, with a fierceness that went beyond grandmotherly love. There was a part of her that was terrified that if people found out, they'd use it to destroy her. Or worse, force you to choose. You're not just her old flame, I whispered. You're my mother's father. He nodded once. Which makes you my grandfather. Silence. The word hung in the air like something holy. I want a DNA test, I said. Already started the process. We have a sample from your grandmother's estate file. Enough to confirm first-degree lineage. He met my eyes. Results in 72 hours. You were that sure? No, he said softly. I just hoped. 3 days later, Nora's office. Bryn reading the lab report aloud, her voice trembling on every syllable. Probability of grandparent-grandchild relationship, 99.94%. The number filled the room. I sat very still and let it settle into my bones. It was real. Garrett Langford, veteran agent, quiet guardian, the man who'd stepped out of the shadows at the exact moment the world was trying to swallow me whole, was my blood. Nora looked up from her desk. This changes the legal landscape entirely. With confirmed biological lineage, we can petition for a full audit of the estate and challenge the will on grounds of inheritance manipulation. But the thing that truly changed everything wasn't the DNA. It was Annalise. 2 weeks after Voss's arrest, she contacted Nora directly, not through the family's attorneys, but through a personal email sent at 2 a.m. She wanted to meet me, alone. We sat across from each other at Harov's, same corner booth, same waitress who brought one slice of pie and set it between us like she didn't know whose side she was on. She looked like a woman who had been dismantled from the inside out, thin in a way that had nothing to do with dieting. Eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who hasn't slept well in months. Not from insomnia, but from the kind of dreams you can't outrun. I know you hate me, she said. Her voice was hoarse, the kind that comes from crying alone too many times. I don't hate you. I just don't understand. Rain tapped the window. The same sound from the night I'd sat here with Bryn a lifetime ago, when everything was just beginning. She told me everything. How Arden had started siphoning money when she was 15. How she hadn't understood at first, only noticed the new cars, the vacations, the renovations that appeared like magic. How he'd pulled her in during law school, not with threats, but with normalization. This is how families work. Your grandmother is old. She doesn't understand modern business. And you believed him? I asked. I wanted to. Her eyes filled. Because if I didn't believe him, then my father was a criminal, and I was his accomplice. You are his accomplice. I know. The word cracked in half as it left her mouth. I drafted the will. I found the notary. I arranged everything. I told myself I was protecting you, that giving you the house was better than letting him bring in someone who'd give you nothing at all. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But you didn't take the crumbs. You fought. And every day you fought, the lie I'd told myself got thinner and thinner until I could see straight through it. The text message, I said, warning me about you. That wasn't Mom. That was you. She nodded. Through Dorothy's old number, I was too afraid to use my own. I sat with that. My sister, who had betrayed me more precisely and more personally than anyone else in my family, had also been the one to send the only warning I'd received. She'd held the knife and whispered, "Watch out," at the same time. It was the most Annalise thing I'd ever heard. I'll testify, she said. Everything. Dad, Voss, the accounts, the will. I don't want a deal. I just want to say the truth out loud at least once. I looked at her for a long time, at the sister who'd taught me eyeliner in our bathroom mirror, who'd once stayed up all night helping me study for the SATs. who'd sat beside me at our grandfather's funeral and said, "At least we still have Grandma." "I don't forgive you," I said. "Maybe I never will." She nodded, tears falling onto the table between us. "But I hear you," I said quietly, "and that's more than you ever gave me." She took the stand at the federal trial, told everything: the embezzlement timeline, the forged will, the payments to Voss through a ghost consulting firm in Delaware. She named names, dates, account numbers. She spoke for 2 hours and 40 minutes without asking for water. Arden lost his composure for the first and only time. He stood up, shouting, "She's lying! She wants a plea deal!" Nora calmly presented the corroborating evidence: FBI wire transfer records, testimony from a Zurich bank employee, the 27 months of phone recordings between Arden and Voss. And Valora, she sat motionless through the entire proceeding. But when Annalise stepped down from the witness stand, their eyes met, and Valora nodded. Once, so slight that if you blinked, you'd miss it. It wasn't forgiveness. It was recognition, an acknowledgement that at least one of her daughters had finally chosen correctly. The verdicts came down in the same week. Arden Phillips, guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, falsification of financial records, conspiracy to obstruct justice, 12 years in a federal penitentiary. When the sentence was read, he stood with his chin slightly raised, the same posture as the funeral, the same expression as the courtroom. But this time, nobody believed the performance. Valora Phillips, guilty of fraud and accessory charges. She hadn't run the scheme, but she'd known from the beginning, known with every dollar spent and every lie told. And she'd chosen silence. 4 years. When the judge read her sentence, she looked at me across the courtroom. One long, unreadable look. Then she turned away. I don't know if it was hatred or regret. I spent many nights wondering. Eventually, I decided it didn't matter. Not because it didn't hurt, but because some questions have answers that change nothing. Annalise Phillips, 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, full cooperation credit, permanent disbarment. She would never practice law again. Judge Harlan Voss, 8 years federal. And Harrow Heritage Holdings, the company my grandmother had built from a single antique shop into something that mattered, was signed over to me. When the ink was still wet on the transfer documents, Bryn burst into tears. "You did it," she whispered, hugging me. "You brought it full circle." "No," I said. "We did." Garrett stood to the side. He never took credit, never asked for recognition, but I could see it in his eyes: pride, and something deeper: wonder. The wonder of a man who had missed decades of his granddaughter's life and was trying to memorize every detail now, as if he could fill in the gaps by paying close enough attention. I wasn't in the courtroom for my parents' sentencing. I didn't need to watch them in handcuffs again. I'd said goodbye to the idea that they were my parents months before the verdict. The paperwork just made it official, but I want you to understand something, because this is the part most stories leave out. I won, and it still hurt. I won, but I'd lost my mother. Maybe forever. I won, but I'd lost a child I never got to hold. I won, but my savings were gone, my career was in ruins, and my marriage had been stretched so thin that some nights I could see light through the fabric. Emmett stayed. He never wavered. But we both carried scars from this. Invisible ones, the kind that ache when the weather changes. The victory tasted sweet, but it also tasted like salt. The house on Wexley Hill, once falling apart, full of silence and secrets and slow decay, was finally finished. Painted warm white with navy shutters, the porch refinished, the garden blooming the way Grandma Eleanor used to keep it. Magnolias and gardenias and a stubborn rosemary bush that refused to die no matter how many times the frost tried to take it. And that evening, for the first time in years, the house was full of laughter. A quiet dinner, no cameras, no reporters, just the people who had stayed when everything fell apart. Bryn brought her famous salted caramel pie. Emmett grilled salmon on the back patio, telling a joke that only he thought was funny, which made it funnier. Silas, the first person to find the chest, came with a bottle of wine and the rarest thing I'd ever seen on his face, a full, unreserved smile. Nora stopped by for a drink and leaned against the doorframe, breathing slowly, like a woman who'd been holding her breath for a year and had finally been given permission to exhale. And Garrett, my grandfather, sat in the library telling a group of guests about the time Eleanor tried to learn to ride a motorcycle at 55 and nearly drove it into the marsh. I set the table with Grandma's china, the set I'd found packed in a crate behind the pantry wall, wrapped carefully, labeled in her handwriting, for the future, if she ever needs it. I hadn't understood then. I understood now, this moment, this house, this table. Bryn raised her glass. To the woman who started it all, to Eleanor Phillips. We all echoed her name. Garrett's hand brushed mine under the table. And to the woman who finished what she started, he said softly. To Cora. I felt tears at the corners of my eyes. Not grief, peace. The rare, hard-won kind that you don't find. It finds you after you've bled enough to earn it. 5 years later, I still wake up early. Sometimes it's habit, sometimes it's memory. The hum of courtroom lights, the click of handcuffs, Emmett's shoulders shaking in the dark. But mostly it's purpose. The house is no longer a home. It's the Eleanor J. Phillips Center for Justice and Creative Renewal. Everyone calls it the Chest, a quiet nod to where everything began. The front parlor holds easels and pottery wheels. The sunroom is a reading lounge lined with secondhand law books and poetry. Upstairs, private therapy rooms and quiet corners where women meet with attorneys or volunteers or simply sit and breathe, sometimes for the first time in months. We run legal workshops on weekends. We sell pies to fund scholarships. Emmett's recipe, perfected over 5 years of early mornings and flour-dusted countertops. I live in the guest house out back, close enough to stay connected, far enough to know this legacy is bigger than me. Bryn runs the nonprofit's legal clinic between cases at her firm. She made partner last year. Garrett volunteers in the library 3 days a week, teaching nervous teenagers how to file their first Freedom of Information requests. Emmett waves from the kitchen window most mornings, flower in his hair, radio playing the country music I pretend to hate. Annalise isn't here. She lives in Portland now, volunteering at a legal aid center. Unpaid work in an office where the copier breaks every week. We exchange messages, short, polite, never warm. Sometimes just photos. She sends a sunrise over the Columbia River. I send back the magnolia tree in bloom. We never call, never say I love you. But we never go silent too long either. Every year on Grandma's birthday, she sends flowers to the center. No card. The first year, I almost threw them away. The second year, I left them on the windowsill until they wilted. This year, the 5th, I put them in Eleanor's porcelain vase and set them on the reception desk. Nobody asked where they came from. Valora wrote twice from prison. I opened the first letter, read 2 lines. You need to understand that I had no choice. And put it in a drawer. The second letter I never opened. It still sits there between Grandma's diary and the photograph of Garrett from 1992. I don't know why I keep it. Maybe because throwing it away would mean an ending, and I'm not ready for that kind of ending yet. This morning, we hosted the 5th annual brunch for survivors. Wrongful conviction, family estrangement, financial abuse. The backyard was a tangle of folding chairs, warm scones, and honest stories told by people who had earned the right to tell them. As I stacked empty cups near the garden gate, a young reporter from the Boston Globe approached, Phoebe Sinclair. Notebook open, pen tapping nervously against the page. "Miss Phillips," she said, "do you mind one last question?" I smiled. "Go ahead." She steadied herself. "After everything, losing your family, fighting the courts, nearly going to prison yourself, losing—" She hesitated. She knew about the miscarriage. Everyone did, after the trial transcripts went public. After all of that, what kept you going when everyone turned against you? I looked out at the magnolia tree we'd planted for Grandma the year after the verdict. Its blossoms had just begun to open, white and pink, soft as promises, stubborn as the woman they were planted for. Then I turned back and said softly, "When the world lies to you, the truth becomes your greatest weapon." She blinked, nodded, wrote it down like it mattered, which it did, because those weren't just words. They were lived, fought for, paid in blood and trust and sleepless nights and every friendship I nearly lost along the way. I walked back toward the house, paused at the front door where a single framed photograph hung beside the entrance, the only personal picture I displayed in a public space. Grandma Eleanor sitting on this very porch, teacup in hand, looking straight into the camera with a smile I finally understood. Not the smile of a woman at peace, but of a woman who had planted a seed and trusted that someone would water it. I touched the glass. "I found the match, Grandma," I whispered, "and I burned every lie to the ground." Then I stepped inside, where Emmett was kneading dough and Garrett was drying dishes, and the door closed behind me, gently, firmly, like a book that had finally found the last page it deserved.